Now, this is going to be a different type of video from my normal ones, as this is going to be outlining an issue I've seen ever since I started playing Dead by Daylight, and I want to kind of give my opinion on it and maybe help some people to see things from another perspective. Now, of course, you've seen the title, so you know this video is going to be about the balance in the game. And I mean the difference between being a killer and being a survivor, how easy it is to play, and essentially how fair it is on either side. Now, it's been covered countless times on YouTube by, big members in the community, on the forums, on Reddit. Basically, it's been spoken about a lot from various points of view. But I haven't really come across examples where the person is being fairly objective. Now, I'm not saying that everyone has just got their opinion and they've completely blanked out other arguments, but for the most part, everyone seems very set in their ways and they don't really stray from their own ideology. And I want to be a bit more objective in this video before giving my opinion on the matter. To preface this, I want to state that I do not consider myself either a killer or a survivor main. I like to play a relatively even amount of both, although I do sway slightly more to the survivor element simply because I've play a lot of games with my friends. I find both to be fun, and on the whole, I very much enjoy the game on the whole. Yeah, it has issues, but I would argue that every game does, and I do tend to overlook them for the majority of the time and focus on the positive and the fun that I have in my over 500 hours of gameplay. I have been a rank 1 survivor on a few occasions, but I do tend to stick around the green, purple ranks. The same goes for killer, although I think the highest rank I got there was rank 6. I don't really consider myself a great player, but on my day I do think I'm pretty decent, not to the level of like Monto and True Talent, Noob 3, all them, but I good enough to stay within the purple ranks. I'm going to split this video into two parts, one explaining the views that survivors are overpowered, and the other covering how killers can easily defeat a group of survivors, all before giving my opinion on the matter. So, here we go. This tends to be the way that the majority of the community thinks, at least from what I've seen. Survivors are way too overpowered. It can be hard to understand this when you're first starting out, or generally in the low ranks from like 18 to 20, but after a bit more game time it's actually quite easy to see how this can be the case. I'm just going to pop some clips from myself and some very good survivors on here to show you the power survivors can have over killers with the simple use of loops and map knowledge. Pallets and looping in general have always been a bit of an issue in the game, with double pallets and vacuum being problems in the past. They're somewhat still prevalent, but the devs have seen to it in patches. However, still today the game can be very survivor orientated. Most of the killers in the game are the victims of looping, running around in a circle around a pallet and or vaults for what can seem like an absolute eternity before receiving a fresh pallet to the face, the resulting stun, all before moving on to the next loop, all whilst the rest of the survivors finish all 5 generators, open the gates, and proceed to teabag the killer before escaping with their friends. Does that sound familiar? Well, unless you've never played the likes of Doctor or Trapper in the red ranks, then it really should. This is often the main point that killers complain about, how it's possible for survivors to do this for the duration of the game because most of the playable killers aren't able to counter this very well, the exceptions being Huntress, Hillbilly, and of course the Nurse as the main 3. However, these killers, they take a lot of skill to play well. The recent Trapper and Hag changes as of time of recording, I would call them buffs personally, have made them slightly more viable, with the Hag's trap setting time helping to eliminate looping, and the recent addition of the Clown also helping with this issue, but still the main choices at higher ranks are the aforementioned 3 killers. This unfortunately streamlines the game at these ranks. I know I've very rarely come across any deviation from this pattern whenever I've played in the red ranks. It can make the game boring, playing the same killers over and over again, and then just hoping that you're able to outplay survivors with mind games and counterplays, which honestly only happen about half the time. With the nurse being the best killer in the game, but her movement speed means that you have to rely on her blinks, which often get caught on certain objects, and you just have to hope that the survivors you chase happen to double back when you expect them to, or turn the right way when you're blinking after them. The Hillbilly and the Huntress are similar. Their powers give them certain advantages, but oftentimes you have to hope that the survivors you chase go the way you anticipate and don't manage to dodge your attacks. On top of the looping issues is the fact that the survivors have the ability to be a group, oftentimes a 4-man on voice comms. This ability to communicate changes the game entirely. Being able to tell each other where traps have been set, what killer it is, locations of the killer and the generators, totems, and a whole lot more tips the game seriously in the favour of the survivors. You'll often find higher ranked survivor friends groups sending out one person to loot the killer for the duration of the game, whilst the rest finish up generators. Survivor perks such as Sprint Burst, Dead Hard, Decisive Strike, they all often act as a sort of get out of jail free card, allowing the players to escape a surefire hit or escape the killer to continue a loop or head for safety. Whilst changes have been made to nerf some of these perks, and more changes to Decisive Strike and the likes of Self-Care are upcoming, they remain top tier perks that almost every high ranked player will run. To make matters worse for killers and their perks is the problem with totems, the ability for survivors to eliminate killer perks from the game. Now these perks are for the most part very, very powerful perks that can alter the entire game, so it is understandable that they can be taken out. But, like, what the actual fuck is this placement? Like, really? Add to this the ability to take in items with add-ons, the indigenous Claudettes of the world who somehow manage to blend into literally everything, plus offerings that can alter the map by making it foggier and darker, then killers can definitely have a hard time in this game without a shadow of a doubt. Now, I've seen this argument pop up a lot throughout my time playing the game, and I must admit I do understand some of the points made. Survivor perks and item add-ons can be very good at countering killers. However, looking at some of the options that are available to killers, it can be so hard to counter some killer builds. The complaints about looping can be countered by arguing that stealth is often not an option. The inclusion of perks like Barbecue and Chili, Now Bitter Murmur, Whispers, and add-ons that allow the killers to see auras within a certain radius eliminates this playstyle as a viable option. How else are survivors supposed to have a chance at escaping and getting points? Pallets and vaults are save points where survivors have the chance to do so. Also, some players, thinking specifically about some Monto videos here, they have incredible hearing and eyesight and are able to see and hear survivors and determine their exact location repeatedly, meaning that survivors have to resort to pallet looping and Decisive Strike to keep the game going for them and give them a chance to actually play. Recent updates do seem to be in killers' favour, some being mentioned in the previous section, but what we're going to talk about here is the exhaustion nerf. This has actually been a pretty big nerf for survivors, not allowing them to recover exhaustion while sprinting. This means that there's no more doubling up of sprint bursts, dead hard, lies and balanced landings within one single chase. It also means that survivors must be careful when it comes to general play. Not a huge impact, but it does mean that sprinting between generators, chests, totems and more may result in you not recovering your sprint burst or dead hard in time to avoid a hit. The number of pallets and windows on certain maps has indeed been reduced since the time I personally started playing back in October, and there are no more long infinite loops to use. Items, especially the flashlights, have also been nerfed so that they're not too overpowered, and the timing of flashlight saves now has to be on point and has even recently changed with the pickup animation being altered. Now to the oh so loved debate of camping, a legitimate strategy. Impossible to counter in certain situations like a face camping Bubba and when nobody has borrowed time. We all know the hurt. A basement trapper build where the shack is just littered with traps. How can you possibly counter this? The change in the unhooking angle has helped in some cases, but face camping is still heavily prevalent, and sometimes there are just no options when it comes to countering this. In general, high rank killers can be unbeatable. With the right setup, totem spawns and such, a good nurse or hillbilly can often wipe the floor with survivors, even if they're good players and in a group. The skill to master these killers is immense, and sometimes they can just outplay each and everything you do. Their ability to control a map with the speed and precision is just unmatchable, and can often result in a easy 4K, or perhaps with one lucky player getting the hatch. I like to think I sit in the middle of the debates. I believe the game is the most balanced it has been since I joined the community. Back then it was without a shadow of a doubt a survivor favoured game, but especially with recent updates it has become much more killer friendly. One thing I like to point out to many people, especially those who play at the top rank consistently, I don't believe this game was made and intended to be a competitive one. Games like Counter-Strike often seem orientated around the highest caliber players, but a game like DBD I feel is made for the masses, and I would say the majority of players do not play at the higher levels, and thus the developers will appease them instead of the minority at the top. In addition to this, it's an asymmetrical game. Literally, it says in the description, which means it is not even on both sides by definition. It's going to be near impossible to make this game even on both sides. One will always be objectively easier. Of course, this doesn't mean that they can't come close, but with the foundations that the game already has, I personally believe that the devs have done a
pretty good job so far,
especially with recent updates, to make the game more balanced. Thoughts on specific aspects now, starting with pallets and looping. The pallet vacuum removal was absolutely necessary, however I still find that getting hit through a dropping pallet is a bit unfair on survivors and needs looking at, as it means that waiting for the drop to get a stun is now a really high risk, one which I'm not often taking these days. Looping is a core aspect of the game now, and I have no real qualms with it on either side. It can be annoying as killer, yes, but I'm never going to berate players for utilising pallets and vaults to their advantage. That's exactly what they're there for. Now that the infinites aren't really a thing anymore, this means that looping, and at least at my average rank, they're not really a thing anymore and don't last more than a minute, and if they do, then I often change targets or I do force errors and decisions on the survivor's part. The other major issue is camping. Now, I really don't condone camping, and I do my absolute best not to resort to it. However, it is necessary and understandable in certain cases. Off the bat, I'll admit this: if you BM me, I will face camp your ass. I couldn't care less about the others or my points. I don't respond well to it, and quite frankly, you deserve it for sitting there teabagging and clicking your little flashlight at me. You're a toxic cunt who needs to leave the community and get hit by a bus. I have no time for you. Same on the other side though. If you camp and tunnel me for no real reason, maybe dying light or something could be an excuse, when all I do is run you and loop, which again I believe is an integral part of the game now, I will BM you at the gates because you're an asshole. Simple as. Now back to the point. Camping ruins the game for others, and it just can't be fun for the killer. So I don't see the point in it really. Being a basement build doesn't really fall under this part, as they're very different, but staying right next to a hook person is just unnecessary and spoils the game for numerous people. It's understandable during the end game when trying to secure a kill, yes, and I really do wish people wouldn't shit on killers for doing what they're meant to do and kill survivors, and those who complain are flat out stupid, I think, but otherwise camping isn't really a good thing to be doing. Now, do killers need nerfing? No, I don't think so. The removal of blood loss would be ridiculous, especially for the likes of Hag and Cannibal. It would make them almost unplayable given their movement speeds coupled with looping, but I do think that some killers can be unplayable sometimes. As I said at the start, I'm a mid-rank player, and when I play a P3 rank 1 nurse with Ruin, Barbecue and Chili, Whispers and Nurses Calling, I just can't see how I can win that. But you know what? That is fine. I'm not going to win every game. I'm not meant to win every game, and that person is just better than me. So what? It can be annoying sometimes, but that's just the nature of video games. Sometimes things just don't go your way. One thing I really hope they get around to is totem placements. Sometimes it is just the worst thing ever to see your ruin on top of a hill for everyone to see. Please, please change this. I personally don't like the planned changes to self-care, but I do understand where it comes from. Decisive Strike does need a nerf, as it is incredibly infuriating as killer, as it resets loops and almost entirely takes away the hard work that you may put in to take someone out, especially if more than one person uses the perk. I like the exhaustion nerf, and I do think it was needed to balance the power that those perks can have over killers, especially when playing against very, very good survivors. Playing against a 4-man survivor friends can be very difficult and infuriating at times, but it's not going to be removed. The exclusion of a cooperative element will cause a riot and is a bad idea for business and the player base. I take having to go through the pain of playing against a 4-man survive with friends group of Claudettes with purple flashlights, decisive strike, sprint burst, self-care and adrenaline over never being able to play with my friends personally. On the whole, I completely understand both sides of the argument, and I do fall in the middle. I'm quite happy with where the game is right now, and besides a few small changes I feel are needed, the game is fun and relatively well balanced right now. The core concept of this game means that there's always going to be an issue here or there with regards to what end of the spectrum the gameplay favours, and there's no way around that, frankly. Personally, I understand why the developers make most of the decisions that they do, and I commend them for sticking with their actions even when there's a lot of pushback from certain people in the community. I remember the uproar around changes they made to a number of locations of pallets by lots of the killer mains. They weren't doing enough to stop looping, I heard many people cry, but they left it, and I honestly can't think of a map that is just ridiculous for killers. Autohaven can be bad sometimes, but I just forced them to throw down pallets in the middle and it's happy days from there. If you take anything away from this video, then let it be this. Bear in mind how difficult it can be to make a game like this with the community we have. Unfortunately, this community is full of toxic little shits who will complain about pretty much anything. It's not really intended to be competitive at the highest levels, so don't berate the devs for trying to balance it around the mid-ranks. That's where the majority of players are likely to sit, and they are trying to run a profitable business, so appeasing the masses is their best bet at keeping their business afloat. I do think that whatever they do is, in their mind, for the true betterment of the game, and by extension us. What they've done, I believe, is take a difficult game base and turn it into a fun, and nowadays much fairer playing field for both sides. Thanks for watching, and if I have missed anything out, please do leave a comment below and let me know what your thoughts are, and I hope this has enlightened you and maybe given you something to think about. Thank you, and I will see you in the next video.